Chair is going to make an announcement on the adjustment of our agenda. We have some bills that we want to get through real quick before we get back to what's the number? Back to 2694. So we're going to, Council, we're going to start off with House Bill 2366. If you could please explain that bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Members of the committee, you have before you for consideration House Bill 2366. This bill comes to you exactly as it was introduced in the House. This bill updates the requirements imposed upon agencies which submit rules to the Legislative Rulemaking Review Committee, specifically regarding fiscal notes. Now, if the rule adjusts any fee or other special revenue account, the fiscal note has to include the affected fund's name, number, and past 5 years of actual expenses and revenues. I'm happy to answer any questions of council. Otherwise, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Philip. Questions of council? Seeing none, are there amendments? Motions? Hearing none, I'll call on the Vice Chair from Mercer.
Mr. Chairman, I move that House Bill 2366 be reported to the full Senate with a recommendation that it do pass.
The question is on the motion that House Bill 2366 be reported to the full Senate with the recommendation that it do pass. All those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it. I declare the motion adopted. The bill will be reported. Next bill on our agenda is House Bill 2957. Council Fletcher, could you please explain this bill?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. House Bill 2957 repeals outdated code sections that relate to, for example, the Governor's Commission on Willow Island, which had a set expiration date back in the 90s, the use of certain alternative fuels in state-owned vehicles, and related to restaurants and hotels. The entities involved, to the extent necessary, were contacted to verify that the sections being repealed are in fact outdated. With that, I'm happy to answer questions.
Thank you, Carl. Are there questions of council? Is there discussion? Amendments? If not, I'll call on the Vice Chair from Mercer.
Mr. Chairman, I move that House Bill 2957 be reported to the full Senate with a recommendation that it do pass.
The question is on the motion that House Bill 2957 be reported to the full Senate with the recommendation that it do pass. All those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it. I declare the motion adopted. The bill will be reported. Next item on the agenda is House Bill 2958. Council Fletcher, could you please explain this bill?
Thank you again, Mr. Chairman. This is another bill just like 2957 that repeals outdated code sections. These relate to public libraries, public markets, log booms and boom companies, and the Horseshoe Pitchers Hall of Fame, and taking timber that's adrift in rivers. All these sections are outdated, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Carl. Questions of council? Discussion? Amendments? Motions? Vice Chair from Mercer.
Mr. Chairman, I move that House Bill 2958 be reported to the full Senate with a recommendation that it do pass.
The question is on the motion that House Bill 2958 be reported to the full Senate with the recommendation that it do pass. All those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it. I declare the motion adopted. The bill will be reported. Next item on the agenda is originating Senate Concurrent Resolution 1. Council Fletcher, will you please explain this resolution?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Originating Concurrent Resolution 1 is a study resolution relating to electronic publication of legal notices. As the committee will recall, Senate Bill 642, which has been reported out of both this committee and the Committee on Finance, requires the State Auditor's Office to set up an electronic database for state agencies to post required legal notices and to set that up by July 1, 2022. Even after the database is set up, however, legal notices are still going to be published in newspapers as required by current code. There was a recognition, though, and it was part of our discussion in this committee, that a transition to largely or exclusively electronic publication is all but inevitable. especially as broadband penetration levels in the state increase. This study resolution is intended to explore the best path forward in that regard. It is supported by both the State Auditor's Office and the West Virginia Press Association. Any legislative recommendations can be considered during the 2022 session, even before the State Auditor's online publication database becomes active. Happy to answer questions, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Carl. Questions of council? Discussion? It's all right. Senator from Wyoming.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So what's going to happen is they're going to be required to put it electronically on their site or some site.
Yes.
And they are also required to still publish in local newspapers.
Yeah, just exactly as it is in current code. We'll do that going forward.
And the study is to see when they'll quit doing that.
Well,
who knows?
The study is exactly that. I mean, when I spoke to Don Smith, the Press Association, they're in full recognition that, something's got to give at some point, because people aren't nearly as many people buying newspapers, and certainly the younger generation, most of them don't even take the newspapers. So we're looking at the best path forward, and so right now we're going to develop the database and the online posting. We're going to do that starting July 1, 2022. Hopefully, even before then, they're going to work on this and figure out a way to go forward.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Further questions of council? Discussion? Amendments? Motions? Seeing none, Vice Chair from Mercer.
Mr. Chairman, I move that Senate Concurrent Resolution 1 be reported to the full Senate with a recommendation that it be adopted, but with a further recommendation that it first be referred to the Committee on Rules.
The question is on the motion that Senate Concurrent Resolution 1 be reported to the full Senate with the recommendation that it be adopted, but with further recommendation that it first be referred to the Committee on Rules. All those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it. I declare the motion adopted. Senate Concurrent Resolution 1 will be reported. For those of you that wish to not be listed as a sponsor on the resolution, please let staff know. Otherwise, everyone who is present will be added as a sponsor. Next item on the agenda is House Bill 2916. Council Childs, could you please explain this bill?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Members of the committee, you have before you the strike and insert amendment for House Bill 2916. The strike and insert amendment only makes stylistic and technical changes to the committee substitute from the House. This bill creates a commission to prepare for and commemorate the country's 250th anniversary. The voting members are appointed by the governor and consist of 3 academic historians, 5 citizens, no more of one of whom can be from any one state senatorial district, and 1 member each from the Sons of the American Revolution and the Daughters of the American Revolution. Also included as ex officio voting members is 1 member each who represents the state superintendent, the Secretary of Commerce, the curator of the Department of Arts, Culture, and History, the commissioner of the Office of Tourism, or soon to be the Secretary of Department of Tourism, director of the Herbert Henderson Minority Affairs Office, the West Virginia State Archivist, and the director of West Virginia State Museums. Additionally, non-voting members shall be 1 from each the West Virginia House and the West Virginia Senate, as well as all of the state's federal legislative representatives. All service members are uncompensated, which is why there's no fiscal note attached to this, but reasonable and necessary expenses may be reimbursed. Additional rules regarding commission's function are laid out in this bill, including the power to establish an advisory committee made up of just citizens with knowledge about the 250th anniversary. The commission can solicit, accept, use, and dispose of gifts, grants, donations, bequests, or other funds or real or personal property for the purpose of aiding or facilitating their work. The commission expires in 2027. So this bill borrows a lot of language from Chapter 4, Article 13 of the Code, which created a commission which expires this year to celebrate the 150th anniversary of the Civil War in this state. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll answer any questions of council.
Thank you, Philip. Questions of council? Discussion? Amendments? Oh, Senator from Preston.
I just have a quick question of council. And this is awfully familiar. Did we have a bill similar to this before, or is this just deja vu all over again?
No, Senator, we actually did. In fact, the senator from Wyoming introduced a bill similar to that in this committee.
Okay, I thought that I'd heard this before. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Further questions of council? Discussion? Amendments? Motions? Vice Chair from Mercer.
Mr. Chairman, I move the strike insert amendment as explained by council.
Is there further discussion? Amendments? Motions? Hearing no further amendments or motions, the question is on the adoption of the strike and insert amendment. All those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it. I declare the strike and insert amendment adopted. Vice Chair from Mercer.
Mr. Chairman, I move that House Bill 2916 be reported to the full Senate with a recommendation that it do pass as amended.
The question is on the motion that House Bill 2916 be reported to the full Senate with the recommendation that it do pass as amended. All those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it. I declare the motion adopted. The bill will be reported. Next item on the agenda is House Bill 2763. Council Fletcher, could you please explain this bill?
Thank you again, Mr. Chairman. The committee has before it for its consideration a proposed strike and insert amendment for House Bill 2763. That bill requires all state agencies, constitutional officers, county boards of education, the judiciary, and the legislature to report cybersecurity incidents to the already existing cybersecurity office within the Office of Technology. The bill defines what qualifies as a cybersecurity incident that must be reported. In general, reporting is required for substantial incidents and not for single or small incidents. House Bill 2763 defines the minimum content of the report and requires the Cybersecurity Office to develop and disseminate the procedure for reporting cybersecurity incidents. The bill mandates the Cybersecurity Office to report annually to the Joint Committee on Government and Finance on the incidents reported to it. This was not an agency bill, but information and cooperation of the Office of Technology was received, and the Office of Technology does not oppose the bill, in fact supports the bill. We have representatives of the Office of Technology here, should there be a need to provide testimony. The strike and insert amendment makes clarifying and technical changes throughout, but does not change the substance of the bill. A title amendment is being offered as well. This bill passed the House by a vote of 95-2 with 3 absent. I'm happy to answer questions, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Carl. Questions of council? Senator from Marion.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Council, quick question.
Yes, sir.
If we already have a cybersecurity office, why are we not reporting cybersecurity incidents to them now? Or is there specific incidents that must be reported that we're changing?
The Cybersecurity Office exists within the Office of Technology. The Office of Technology generally applies only to the executive branch and state agencies. This bill expands the cybersecurity reporting to all branches, the legislature, the judiciary, and to county boards of education. So, and the constitutional officers. They are not included as well in the normal ambit of authority of the Office of Technology. So this is much broader and actually requires the reporting and is going to prescribe how that is done. With respect, typically with the Office of Technology, many of the other agencies, the constitutional officers are required or at least suggested that they cooperate with the Office of Technology, but they are not required to do so.
Got you. Thank you, Council. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Further questions of council? Discussion? Call on the Vice Chair from Mercer to move the strike and insert.
Mr. Chairman, I move the strike insert amendment as explained by council.
Is there further discussion? Amendments? Motions? Hearing no further amendments or motions, the question is on the adoption of the strike and insert amendment. All those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it. I declare the strike and insert amendment adopted. Vice Chair from Mercer.
Mr. Chairman, I move that House Bill 2763 be reported to the full Senate with a recommendation that it do pass as amended.
The question is on the motion that House Bill 2763 be reported to the full Senate with a recommendation that it do pass as amended. All those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it. I declare the motion adopted. The bill will be reported. Vice Chair from Mercer.
Mr. Chairman, I move the title amendment as explained by council.
All those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it. I declare the title amendment adopted. So, just to repeat what I stated earlier, House Bill 2002 has been taken off the agenda for today to be taken up at a later date. And now we will go back to the bill that we recessed on, House Bill 2694. If you want, Council, give us a quick little re-intro of the bill to get us back to discussion.
Sure. This bill is the Second Amendment Preservation Act. It mainly prohibits state agencies, political subdivisions, or employees thereof, forbids them to actively engage against citizens regarding federal gun charges and any cooperation with federal law enforcement in furtherance of its engagement specifically against federal gun crime. And I'm happy to answer any questions.
I believe we were in the discussion phase. So, further questions of council? Discussion? Junior Senator from the 8th.
Yes, Mr. President, I'd like to call a witness, the Chief of Police of Charleston, Tyke Hunt.
The junior senator from the 8th asks for unanimous consent for the Chief of Police from Charleston to address the committee. Hearing no objection, please join us. If you will, for the record, please state your name and your title.
My name is James Tyke Hunt, and I'm the Chief of Police of the Charleston Police Department.
Welcome to our committee, James. If you will, raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm that your presentation today before the committee is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do, sir.
Junior Senator from the 8th.
Yes. Chief, thank you for being here. I think you've been here most of the day today, and I appreciate your patience. I know it's been a long time coming, but I just want to ask you just a few questions to kind of refresh the committee members' recollection of earlier testimony. You were here when Officer Napier was testifying as to not only the concern about coordination between federal and state law enforcement, but also the possibility based upon his experience of lost funds. You remember that?
I do, sir.
And I think he referred, because he pointed back to you as far as should this piece of legislation pass and the funding would be lost, that it sounded like it would decimate the metro unit here in Charleston. And so, A, is that true? And B, could you just explain to the committee how that works and why this bill would have that impact?
If this bill passes and those funds do go away, the Metro Drug Unit will not exist. We cannot afford to fund the Metro Drug Unit. Metro Drug Unit is self-funded through all of the searches, seizures, and everything that goes into those investigations and the partnerships, and then the money is then split amongst all of those partnerships that they do have with all of the federal agencies, ATF. Drug investigations, as you heard Chad Napper speak on, aren't just isolated to a specific area. They do go out of state, they sometimes go out of country. We do need our federal partners to be able to enforce those laws. So if those partnerships go away, then we cannot effectively run a drug task force in Charleston, and then we will soon have a drug problem here, a bigger drug problem in Kanawha County.
Okay. Now, one of the things I wanted to touch on, too, before we broke a couple hours ago, and I think maybe there must have been some misunderstanding that the senator from Mercer was asking about, whether or not this bill has to do with drugs or whether it has to do with guns. Can you just explain, and I think Officer Napier did a good job of this, but it's been so long ago. Can you explain how the two can't be separated when you're talking about drug crimes?
That is true. I was the commander of the Metro Drug Unit briefly, and then also I worked in the Detective Bureau for 10 years, 5 years as an investigator, 5 years as a supervisor, and I can tell you that guns and drugs do go hand in hand. But if you want to take the attorney at his statement of we were comparing apples and oranges here, let's compare apples to apples. Line 31, number 7, is talking about, I'll give you just a moment to flip to that. It talks about having a facility dedicated specifically to investigations that pertain to federal firearm violations. The Charleston Police Department has that. That is our NIBIN unit. You heard Detective Crawford speak on that earlier. Apologize there. You heard him speak on that earlier about what that is. That essentially is any casing that is ejected from a firearm leaves markings on that casing, and it's a fingerprint. So any crime scene we go to that has shell casings, we can collect those. We begin to build a database and track that. Now we have had a couple unsolved shootings, some wanton endangerments where some cars or houses got shut up, and now we catch somebody with a gun. We do the test fire on that gun, and it matches all of these. We have been able to link all of those cases. So that's what NIBIN is. NIBIN is funded by the ATF. That office was paid for by the ATF. The NetJet line, the high-speed internet line that is needed to upload those very detailed photos to make those comparisons, is funded by the ATF. The amount of entries and the time it takes to compare that data is far too much for me to dedicate an officer to. So we have a civilian on staff that does that testing. That civilian is funded by the ATF. Now, it says there specifically in that language, investigations for federal firearms violations. That, if you use, again, the attorney's language, when he said, we know that the ATF is primarily focused on firearm violations, out of his mouth, that is specifically discriminating against ATF and anything they do. We heard testimony about defunding the police, and you've heard a bunch of maybes and what-ifs. I'm here to tell you that it most certainly will, to a degree, defund the police. I have 2 full-time task force officers assigned to the ATF. They reimburse portions of their salary. They provide vehicles. They provide equipment. And then also I have several officers that are eligible for overtime under the ATF. So if we do a warrant sweep or some other initiative that is sponsored by the ATF, such as any violent crimes involving firearms, ATF would gladly sponsor that type of overtime. Our department gets reimbursed for that. We are able to go out and put a bigger dent in the crime, not only in Charleston, but in Kanawha Valley, because it is a task force. With that task force, we go all over. Now we make the whole Kanawha Valley, all the way down to Beckley to Huntington, we go all over. We help out. We take these bad folks off the streets. All possible because of our joint partnership, that task force with a federal entity that investigates firearms. Now, I'm not saying we're out there targeting the folks that just want to go out and exercise their Second Amendment rights. Being an investigator for the majority of my career, I can honestly tell you I have never seen that in the city of Charleston. You see this bill, and it starts off talking about entangled with federal agencies and being bogged down and acting like this is tying our hands or tying up our time. No, that is an investigative multiplier. With that, you look at it like a football team. I personally have the largest football team in the state of West Virginia next to state police. These other federal agencies are like having an offensive coordinator, a defensive coordinator, a fitness coach. With that, everybody's got these different specialties. We can now make the best team possible to go out there and get some progress done. So I hope that clears up a lot of that.
I appreciate the analogy. It's easier to grasp what we're really talking about here. And I think the testimony has that it's likely this bill will likely result in loss of funding, but it's a certainty that ATF will take a hit and not exist. At least I believe that was a testimony from Mr. Napier earlier today. And you can't operate as a chief of police without ATF support, I would imagine, as far as the drug unit's concerned.
The drug unit, I know the Huntington drug unit, their primary sponsor is ATF. So without that funding, this bill would kill that task force down there. But if you want to take it to you heard ATFE, the explosives part of that. I personally worked on investigations where an explosive was placed under a vehicle. Investigating that, we have to use the ATF to investigate that because the explosive is part of the firearm and it meets those definitions. We use them to send everything to their lab for testing and different things. If you look at our SWAT team, one of the things that all SWAT teams across the nation, they're flashbangs, distraction diversionary devices. Those are controlled and monitored by the ATF because it is an explosive device. Where are we going to stand when it comes to taking away the safety of our SWAT team folks? And the only reason we call SWAT team is because it is such a high risk. It's too dangerous for normal police officers to go in there. We need the special weapons and tactics of those SWAT officers. Are we going to tie the hands there that we can't use this because the way this is written, you're tying our hands with the ATF? I think the knowns of how it will hurt law enforcement and the possibilities that we don't know is far too dangerous. I would ask that you reconsider. I am wholeheartedly for supporting the Second Amendment. I'm excited that I have folks in this room that want to stand up and ensure that my kids and grandkids can get out there and have their own firearms and be able to hunt and kill their first squirrel when they're 10, different things like that. That was actually the age of my youngest boy when he first got his. I'm excited about that, but the way this is written, we have got to put a few changes to it or you will tie law enforcement's hands and we will see more criminal activity.
Chief, is there anything else you'd like to say?
A lot more, sir, but I believe we got the point across.
All right. Thank you, Chief. I appreciate it.
Thank you, man.
Seeing no other lights on, Chief, thank you for joining us today. Further discussion, Senator from Preston.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I may have been a little too late. Earlier, I saw former Sheriff Ward in the room, but he may have slipped out or he might be in the hall. If he's there, I'd love to have him come up and give his perspective. Oh, here we go.
Okay. Mr. Ward, you've been asked to speak before the committee. If you will, please step forward. For the record, please state your name and who you're here on behalf of.
My name is Brian Ward. I'm a delegate. Actually, Senator Smith called me up and for the discussion on House Bill 2694.
All right. Well, I don't have to swear you in. You've already been sworn into your duties, so Senator from Preston.
Thank you, Delegate. I appreciate you being here today. Over here. And I didn't realize you were going to be here, but I saw you in the audience, and I thought maybe you were here to speak to this bill. Of course, you saw this earlier when it went through the House of Delegates, and I know that you're a former sheriff. Is that right? You were the sheriff of Hardy County for a couple
Correct.
of terms over there.
The last 8 years of my 28 years in law enforcement were as the elected sheriff in Hardy County.
Yeah, there seems to be a lot of concern over this bill defunding the efforts of law enforcement in the state. Could you give us your perspective on that? And do you feel that this bill is putting the law enforcement in peril?
I've been 49 days in the state legislature, and I'm getting a crash course on how much our work that we do in the state is tied to federal funds. I understand that, with every argument, you get the sky is falling response from both parties, and there's hyperbole. I would submit that there would be problems incurred with adoption of 2694 as written for some of the larger task forces which deal with certain things. I'm just speaking with Sheriff Stevens, and there are several what ifs that may be it may be practical to perhaps amend to striking anything that's not currently in line with state law. Let me back up, if I may, take the liberty to, in my entire career in law enforcement, I've never had a bad encounter with any police officer, whether it be city, county, state, or federal. We're a team, and throughout my career, we've had a number of conversations, hundreds of conversations, back when Clinton was in office, and then Obama, and we would kind of sit around and joke about, well, what are we going to do when the feds come and tell us that we need to go kick in our neighbor's door to get those scary black guns or high capacity magazines. And every conversation with every officer that I've ever met ended with, that's the day I turned my badge in. When I first got acquainted with this legislation, obviously it was in response to the fears coming out of the White House and a liberal federal government, which is whichever way they can will in all likelihood try to impose on our Second Amendment rights. The answers are difficult. I don't. The legislation initially, my concern was that potentially you'll have a liberal mayor appoint a liberal chief, and then all of the officers that I've spoken with that said, well, that's the day I turned my badge in. My fear is that good officers will perhaps be dismissed for insubordination, and I wanted to offer them some protection so that they could stand by their concern for the Second Amendment and our Constitution as a whole, with unconstitutional mandates coming out of D.C. And I was reading some interesting articles, and not to buy into the whole hyperbole thing, but I was reading several articles on guards at Auschwitz and some of the other concentration camps that, why we were just following orders, and that was the response to some of the subsequent hearings, and then further into the psychology of why some good people do bad things when they are just following orders, that they have some distance from the task at hand. And I'm certainly not a psychologist. I'm not going to impress anybody with my knowledge of what happened in the concentration camps, but the current law, the intention for 2694 was to offer protection so that officers would never have to be faced with that ultimatum that do your job or you'll be dismissed for insubordination. And I've probably talked more than you asked me to, but and with that said, there are a number of questions that have to do with the what ifs and the monies. There are certain hypotheticals that are realities in law enforcement where you might encounter something that is specifically a federal law that we don't have a like state law to go along with it, and sometimes the bad guy gets away. When trying to weigh the pros and the cons, as I mentioned earlier, with the amount of money that the federal government has in relation to our proposed budget, it's something like 2/3, and there's a significant amount of money, perhaps in the millions of dollars. If it's $1.8 million, that would be $1 per citizen to relinquish your liberties. And my liberty is not for sale, and I'm happy to answer questions. I don't have a lot of details with the task force as such. I policed a small community where those arrangements were limited, but this has far-reaching consequences with the safety of law enforcement officers generally who may be inclined to follow a federal order which makes our people feel threatened.
Thank you, Delegate. I think that's something that we really hadn't talked a lot about, but you're saying that this bill actually is going to provide a protection so that if an officer was asked to do something which they felt was really out of line, that they could refuse that without having consequence of insubordination.
Senator, that was my original intention, and my primary concern was that good officers would act in fear of their own jobs and or potentially be dismissed for insubordination were they not to comply. And of course, you try to think that argument a little bit further. Who's going to fill that vacuum? A bunch of liberals that are going to be happy to step in and fill those positions. And I'm about as frank as you get when it comes to my views on these matters.
Right. Well, I appreciate your perspective on this. It's one that I really haven't heard so far, but thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Delegate, we have some other lights on. Junior Senator from the 8th.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Delegate, thank you for being here today. How you said, I think you testified that you were a sheriff in Hardy County for the last few years of your 28-year career in law enforcement?
The 2 terms, the last 8 years, sir.
Okay. In that time, have you ever seen a local or state law enforcement individual be dismissed for insubordination for not following the federal law?
I have not.
Okay, I just want to make sure, because I know you just testified that's one of your concerns, and I want to make sure that you've, not in your 28 career, have you seen that before?
I have not.
Okay. As far as your career in law enforcement, was it always in Hardy County, or was it throughout the state, or I'm trying to get an idea of your background?
I spent 2 years as a deputy, and then from 2014 to 2006, I worked with Moorefield Police Department, and I returned in 2006 and retired the last day of last year.
Okay. So I take that all in Hardy County then, right?
Yes, sir.
Thank you, sir. Okay. And I think you've already said this, but I just want to make sure in that time, you had, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but it seemed like you admitted that you don't have a lot of experience with task force, like with the HIDA task force or with AFT, correct?
Correct, I don't.
Okay. All right. I just want to make sure I understood that. As outside of, and I think also you said, you mentioned the fact that while you realize the concern that that should this bill become law in its current form, that it would result in loss of funds, or may result in loss of federal funds for our local law enforcement, right?
Yes.
Okay. So, and I mean, I'm not trying to play semantics, but should that happen, that would be the definition of defunding the police, wouldn't it?
In a perverse kind of way, it's not defunding the police, and to achieve any objective, there are plenty of avenues to get the job done. Again, I've never had a bad experience any time that I've needed to work with the Marshal Service for fugitive recovery, or if there's sex crimes, or if there's another agency that is better suited to handle a certain type of organized crime. Those don't just go away because federal dollars go away. There's still men and women with all sorts of different colors of uniforms that specialize and take pride in certain investigations. And the dissolution, or if there's a task force specifically tied to federal gun laws, laws are still going to be enforced. And that's where I've heard so many sky is falling, or the sky will fall if this goes away. But again, it comes down to the realities. I could go on, but I'll try to be specific to the question.
As far as, and I'll get back to that. And my only point in bringing that is, if you have money for a program and you lose money for the program, you're defunding that program, right?
Yeah, the program as such.
Okay. Well, I just want to make sure we're talking about the same thing. And I don't think you were in the hall. I think you were in the hall when Chief Hunt from Charleston Police Department testified as far as the impact on this bill in Charleston. I think he testified that the Charleston Metro unit would lose funding. That's the drug unit, and would not be able to exist without it. That's pretty important, right? That's a big deal. You would agree with that, right?
It's a big deal if you have no benchmark, but for the problems that we're going to incur by following the lead of what would be perhaps unconstitutional is when you weigh that against possibly infringements on liberty. I don't know that there's a cost that West Virginia citizens should be willing to pay.
That's a big deal, right?
Are you asking me, or
yes.
you? I would think everybody in this room would think it's a big deal.
To lose your drug metro unit.
To lose a portion of our liberties.
Well, no, I'm focused on the chief testified that should this bill become law, that he would lose $250,000 in his metro unit here in Charleston Police Department, okay? And my only question to you is that a big deal?
I can only attest to the small communities, which are most of the communities in West Virginia, that don't operate around task forces.
Okay, I want you to answer my question. Is that a big deal?
I can't. If I were the sheriff or I were the chief in that area, I'd have a better way to answer your question.
You
But
don't have
my
any-
budget was $1 million, and some of these task forces.
I'm letting him answer.
Chairman, he cannot answer what the Charleston Police, if he would do if he was Charleston Police Enforcement. He is badgering the witness. He is
Excuse
trying to
me?
be honest with him,
He-
and he is trying to get him to answer a question that he's not qualified to answer.
Committee will be in order. Please keep your questions pertaining to the witness's expertise.
You have no reason to disagree with the chief of police of Charleston, do you?
I have no reason to disagree with any officer.
And therefore, if he, as far as people coming in and claiming that the sky is falling, he has a right to make that claim, doesn't he?
I can't speculate.
And you can't disagree with that, can you?
I can only agree that the
Not answering the question.
majority of his men and women that are out there doing the job will still be doing the job, irrespective of what monies.
Sir, you've testified that you don't have the experience in that regard, that you don't know enough about the metro unit to answer, and all I'm asking you is you can't disagree with his testimony on the issue. That's a
I think
simple-
I've answered that question.
You can't disagree with him, can you?
I can't answer.
Okay. Thank you.
Further questions of our guest? Senator from Ohio.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Delegate, thank you for being here. Good to see you again. My question is related to officer safety. You had mentioned officer safety when you originally testified here today, and it was really in regard, I think, to perhaps an officer maybe being discharged from his position if he weren't to follow a directive from a supervisor. And so I want to talk about officer safety in a different way, specifically with officers being out on the front lines, making arrests, executing search warrants, and ask you this, and you've spent maybe your life, but certainly a lot of your law enforcement career in Hardy County and in Moorfield, smaller town that I don't believe has a federal law enforcement presence. I'm from, not from a city like Charleston, but I'm from Wheeling, a little bit bigger. We don't have a major federal law enforcement presence, but we typically have an ATF agent, one ATF agent. Used to have more, and then things got shifted around. So this ATF agent, if she has someone who is under investigation, who is a violent criminal, who's got a lot of guns and who knows what else, has to execute a search warrant. In my town, that ATF agent is not going to go and execute that search warrant by herself. What she's going to do is contact the local drug task force, which is made up of Wheeling police officers, state troopers, Ohio County Sheriff's deputies. We typically will have a DEA agent, but sometimes we don't because they get promoted and they get transitioned out and so on. Let me stop there and say this as my question. Wouldn't you agree that force multiplication, the working with local and state officials is important for that ATF agent's safety as she goes to execute a search warrant to go in and seize the criminal evidence and also perhaps to make an arrest? That it's important to have this collaboration with state and federal agents to protect police officers so that they don't go in undermanned.
I would agree.
Okay, and so that was the only point I wanted to make. That, and I'm sure you've had opportunities in your career to work with other agencies. If you've got a major law enforcement operation, you don't want to you didn't send just one deputy to go and arrest the worst of the worst. Is that fair to say?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Thank you. That's all I have, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Senator from Tucker.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Brian, for being here. First of all, I want to say I appreciate your 38 years of experience in law enforcement and the service to the people in Hardy County. And, you know, it's just as important to the people in Hardy County as it would be someone in Bond County, Kanawha County, whatever. So we want you to know that the majority of the committee does appreciate your law enforcement service and your expertise, because I'm sure
been
in
a
38
privilege.
years you've seen a lot of things.
28 years.
28 years, okay, I'm sorry. You've seen a lot of things, and a lot of things change. This bill here, we hear a lot of if the funding, if the federal government does this, if the funding's taken from this, if. The only time that this would take effect is if the federal government overreaches their boundaries on our Second Amendment. Would you agree with that?
Yes.
Only if the federal government does some bonehead gun compensation or whatever.
You're
That's
speaking
the
my
only time
language,
this
sir.
bill would take effect. It wouldn't take effect for anything, only if something bad came down.
That's
Would you
my
agree?
understanding of the bill.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. One more light on Senator from Mercer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to go back to my line of questions from earlier today, where I was trying to clarify what the bill says versus what people are afraid it says. My reading of the bill is it applies exclusively to taking away guns that are perhaps legal in West Virginia and not legal by either are or might become illegal by federal standards, and exclusively and explicitly applies to guns. Do drug operations by my interpretation are not exclusively guns. There may be guns there. There may be guns that are legal in West Virginia there. But if a drug raid happens and they find guns that are used in a crime or are illegal in the context of the drug operations, the operation was not exclusively to go get somebody's gun. So would this bill affect, if an ATF officer said, I want to go hit this drug raid, will you go with me? Our officers would say yes. Would that not be true?
That's my understanding, and if I can take the liberty to read the conducting enforcement or investigation duties associated with a joint law enforcement task force include the sharing of confidential information with other law enforcement agencies for the purposes of task force investigations, so long as the following conditions are met. The primary purpose of the joint law enforcement task force is not federal firearms law enforcement, and the enforcement or investigative duties are primarily related to a violation of state or federal law unrelated to federal firearm law enforcement. So I think that,
Right. So
and I'm reading from the draft or the proposed bill, so I think that answers that question.
by that interpretation, there's no reason to disband any drug task force, right? This would not affect a drug task force in any way.
My reading of it, and I'm not an attorney, but my reading of it, I'm very comfortable with the language.
To me, to do another illustration, the only thing that would apply, I'll try to make one where it would apply. Let's say people use shotguns to do trap shooting. And the federal government came along and says, you can no longer have a shotgun for any reason. It is now federally illegal. We're going to go around and we're going to put a task force together to take away everybody's shotguns in everybody's homes everywhere. Our officers would say, sort of paraphrasing here, our officers say, go by yourself. I'm not going to do that. And that's pretty much the full scope of the bill, right?
That's my understanding.
Well, I just don't see where, if that interpretation is clear, I don't see where all the what if and gloom and doom is predicted to guarantee it's going to happen.
I'll say that there's other law enforcement officers to the previous gentleman that had questioned me, asked me specific questions about, having an intimate knowledge of the task force operations. I know that there's other law enforcement officers in here that can speak to those issues. This is my reading of it, and again, it comes down to doing what we can to protect our law enforcement officers so that they're not put into a position where they have to, they didn't sign on to go kick a neighbor's door in to get a 30-round magazine.
Right. But
And,
any other mission that's not confined exclusively to taking away that category of firearms that the federal government has deemed to be illegal in West Virginia have it. That's the only context this applies to. Everything else, it doesn't look to me like it would apply.
Most of the what-ifs that I've heard have been, a choir boy is coming out of church and he gets stopped and he has a sawed-off shotgun in plain view on the back seat with no other circumstances. That's a what-if.
And if there's a
How
crime,
practical is it? Anybody can. I've just never encountered anything like that before.
if a crime is committed and there's shell casings on the ground and so forth, that wouldn't be exclusively to take away firearms. That would be to investigate a crime. Is that not true?
Correct.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think that's all the questions I have.
Thank you. Delegate, I see no further lights on. Thank you for joining our committee at this late hour.
My pleasure. Thank you.
I see the lead sponsor sitting out in the committee. If he would like to maybe come and speak to the bill, answer some questions that has arisen that maybe he may have some input on. Welcome to our committee in the West Wing. If you will,
Thank you,
state
Mr.
your name
Chairman.
for the record.
I am Brandon Steele, delegate from the 29th, chairman of House GovOrg.
Delegate, if you will, just maybe give a little reasoning for introducing this bill and answer some questions that has arisen during this committee process.
Well, I've had the benefit of listening to a lot of the debate today, and I appreciate you guys taking this bill up. It's very important to a lot of people in the House, as well as a lot of people across the state. I introduced this bill because of what we're facing on a federal level. You can't ignore the fact that Congress has, at least on the House of Representatives side, passed a bill that would outlaw 30-round magazines, or any magazine above 10 rounds, that would outlaw rifles that are semi-automatic, that would include your modern sporting rifles, such as an AR-15 and so forth. There's a lot of things in that bill that did pass Congress, or at least the House of Representatives, that would not be right now illegal under West Virginia law. One of the things that we need to focus on in this bill that I've always thought is what is illegal under West Virginia law. You know, one of the big fears that comes out as we listen to law enforcement and other individuals that are maybe been federal prosecutors in the past or something like that is that maybe somebody's going to get a hold of a rocket launcher. That's already illegal under West Virginia law. Can't get a rocket launcher. Can't get a machine gun. Can't get a silenced weapon that's not already licensed by the federal government. You can't get a short-barreled shotgun that's not already licensed by the federal government under the NFA. Those things are already illegal under West Virginia law. So what does this bill point at is the ultimate question. This bill points at federal gun law that is not already illegal under West Virginia law. Okay, so the talk about drug task force and these kind of things, myself, I've been a prosecutor for the Beckley-Raleigh County Drug and Violent Crime Task Force. I was for a great period of time. I handled their criminal prosecutions. I handled their asset forfeitures and various other cases. And I can tell you that they go after drugs. They don't go after guns. It's not a big thing that's going on in Beckley and Raleigh County. Now, I'll tell you that Raleigh County has one of the worst drug problems in the state, but we've never been hampered by getting held up on federal gun law. As a matter of fact, I've prosecuted individuals that have traded guns for narcotics. In one particular case, it was an individual that went around buying up legal West Virginia firearms to trade to neo-Nazis out of Oklahoma who went and took those guns to the border, to the cartel in Mexico, and traded those guns for narcotics and brought them back to West Virginia. And that individual sold narcotics throughout southern West Virginia and Raleigh and Wyoming County and Mercer County. I prosecuted him on state law. So the concerns that you're hearing today about drug and violent crime task forces being completely defunded are completely null and void. I mean, this is a lot of conjecture, because we have cases like Prince versus United States, in which the federal government has already said, our U.S. Supreme Court has already said, that you cannot withhold funding because you refuse to enforce a federal law that is not actually state law as well, okay? So what these anti-commandeering cases have said is the federal government doesn't get to grab your Wyoming County Sheriff's deputy and say, hey, go out and take Johnny's 30-round magazine. Because we all know Johnny's got 30-round magazines. I've got them. I mean, you've probably got 20 of them yourself. You know, that's the thing, is are we going to use our state law enforcement to go grab this stuff? Okay? That's what the bill's all about. Rocket launchers, grenades, machine guns, silenced weapons, short-barrel shotguns, that's already illegal under West Virginia law. If you want to use a gun in a drug crime, you want to use a gun to rob a bank, rob a convenience store, already illegal under West Virginia law. That is not going to hold our law enforcement up. What this bill about is doing your job as a representative of the people to protect their firearms rights, their Second Amendment rights, from infringement by an overzealous federal government. And what do we mean by an overzealous federal government? A government that is going to make things illegal that aren't necessarily should be illegal under executive orders, under actions of Congress that are invalid or unconstitutional. It takes our law enforcement out of the realm of enforcing laws that are questionable and says, hey, look, if you guys want to do this, by all means, make your federal gun law, go enforce it yourself. We're not going to participate because we're not sure about it. Let me give you another example. And this is one of the things I talked to the Speaker about when we talked about this bill. The Speaker, myself, we're both attorneys. I work in corporate law. I work for a trucking company. The Speaker is probably one of the most knowledgeable attorneys I've ever met in my life. And I said, Roger, you're heading down the road. You get pulled over by a Clay County Sheriff's deputy, and he finds a short-barrel shotgun in the seat. How is he to know whether that short-barrel shotgun meets the definition of the ATF regs? Well, I don't know. He's never had a class from the academy on what the ATF regs are on a short-barrel shotgun. Let me give you an example. I've got a Shockwave, Mossberg Shockwave 590. Comes with a letter from the ATF. This shotgun is about that big. I get a letter from the ATF that comes with the shotgun that says this shotgun meets the definition of a legal shotgun under ATF regulations. Now, I'm paraphrasing. It's a long letter. It's about 4 pages. You get it when you buy the shotgun. I don't carry it in my car. I don't put it in my wallet. But if I had that shotgun in my car and a Clay County Sheriff's deputy pulls me over and he looks in this passenger seat and he sees that gun, without this bill, you're putting him in a position of determining whether or not that meets ATF regs. ATF regs are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of pages. There are court cases that go on forever and ever to determine whether or not that is a short-barrel shotgun. But what that letter does for me is the ATF tells me up front, I'm fine. I can buy that. I bought it from a registered dealer. I bought it from a firearms dealer, okay? And I said, Mr. Speaker, that Clay County Sheriff's deputy does not know whether or not that is a short-barrel shotgun because he's not had a class for 10 hours, 12 hours. He's not been a seasoned ATF agent for 6, 8 years where he's, operating a field post where he knows the definition of a short-barrel shotgun. He's a Clay County Sheriff's deputy. He's trying to go home at the end of the day. He's trying to keep his family alive, okay? He doesn't know federal law. But let's change it up for a second. Let's say that it's not a short-barrel shotgun in your passenger seat. It's an open briefcase. And the Speaker, myself, corporate lawyers, maybe the Speaker has documents from Monsanto in his briefcase opened up. Maybe those documents are inside information. Do you want that Clay County Sheriff's deputy to sit there and do an investigation on the side of the road to determine whether or not the Speaker of the House of Delegates is in possession of unlawful documents under the Insider Trading Act? Now, wait a minute. We don't want our sheriff's deputies and police officers doing that. We don't task them with doing that, of figuring out whether or not somebody has violated federal securities law. We don't do that. As a matter of fact, that deputy, that police officer probably look down and say, hey, shut your briefcase, yeah, have a good one. Take on. That'd be the end of it. Another example. Got Kanawha County Sheriff's deputies. Maybe the city of Charleston, chief here. Maybe we need to give him a grant for $3 million to get a set of Erlenmeyer flasks to put in the trunk of every cruiser of every car in Kanawha County, every police car in Kanawha County, to go out and test Keymores, Bear, everybody else, as to whether or not they're violating EPA regulations by dumping stuff in the river. Are we doing that? No, we're not doing that. So why is this different? What I'm telling you is there are finite gun laws in the state of West Virginia that we've abided by for over 150 years. What we have right now is the threat, and the imposed threat, as it's been acted upon in Congress right now, to impose gun laws that a lot of people in this state feel would be unconstitutional, or in the alternative, infringe upon rights that are protected by the West Virginia Constitution. What we're telling our police officers is we're not telling them to go fight the federal government. What we're telling them is just back off. If these guys want to go do this, let them go do it themselves. They can spend their own money. Now, what Prince versus the United States says is, what that says is the federal government cannot withhold money from a state for the fact that they won't go out and enforce federal law. Now, I'm paraphrasing there, okay? On top of that, this bill, now I think there were questions earlier today about who wrote this bill, where did it come from, this, that, and the other. I'm a lawyer. I write my own bills for anybody that asked. I wrote my bill. This came from California. It comes from their sanctuary city laws. Those have been upheld in the Ninth Circuit when the Trump administration came to withhold money from the state of California for refusing to enforce federal immigration law. The Ninth Circuit has already upheld the same language that says that you can't withhold funds from a state because they won't enforce your federal law that is not also state law. So, you can decide right now. Either you don't like the bill or you do. Either you like gun rights or you don't. Vote against it, don't. It's up to you. Either you're going to stand for your constituents' Second Amendment rights, or you're going to fall in line with the bootlickers up in Congress that want to take your 30-round magazines, want to take your semi-automatic rifles from your citizens.
There is that the bill actually hasn't been moved, so the motion is to move the bill. Is there discussion? So the lights are on. Anyone want to discuss the motion from the senator from Ohio to move the bill?
Am I free, Mr. Chairman?
Maybe. We'll vote on this motion. Senator from Lewis.
So, being in the leave of committee, having him testify, is that in order of moving for consideration of the bill?
In my opinion, it is correct procedure right now to have a motion to move the bill. But we're going to vote on the motion. So the motion is to move the bill. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. Ready to move the bill. You're free to go, Delegate. Thank you for joining us today. Vice Chair from Mercer.
Mr. Chairman, I move that House Bill 2694 be reported to the full Senate with a recommendation that it do pass, but under the original double committee reference, first be referred to the Committee on Judiciary.
The question is on the motion that House Bill 2694 be reported to the full Senate with the recommendation that it do pass, but under the original double committee reference, first be referred to the Committee on Judiciary. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. No. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it. I declare the motion adopted. Bill will be reported. Is there further business to come before the committee? Hearing none, I'll call on the Vice Chair for a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I move to adjourn.
Motion is to adjourn. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, no. We're adjourned.